Our next speaker joins us tonight from Afghanistan, a country we know is in the news for all the wrong reasons, but one I suspect most of us know very little about beyond what we see reported in the news. Dr. Sakina Yacoubi is in Melbourne as a delegate at the UN conference Advance Global Health. Sakina's two great passions are her country, Afghanistan, and the importance of a good education. With that in mind, she founded the Afghan Institute of Learning in 1995 in an attempt to increase literacy rates and education in her home country. She continued this work through the reign of the Taliban. No mean feat in any circumstance, but particularly when militants targeted schools and individuals who appeared to be influenced by Western culture. Even now, as the Institute's executive director, working as a teacher remains almost as risky as going into the military. 7 million women and children have been assisted with education and health services over this time by working at grassroots level. The Institute was also the first organisation to offer human rights and leadership training to Afghan women and the first to open women's learning centres. Dr. Yacoubi is an internationally recognised social entrepreneur. As such, she's a senior Ashoka Fellow, which is quite an esteemed recognition, and has received multiple awards and honours, including the Jonathan Mann Award for Global Health and Human Rights, the Peter Gruber Foundation's Women's Rights Prize, the Henry R. Kravis Award for Leadership, and 3 honorary doctorates. Please give a very warm Melbourne welcome to Dr. Sakina Yacoubi.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. First of all, I am so honored to be here. I really appreciate you inviting me here to share with you what's going on with my country. And specifically, I am honored to be in Melbourne because I find Melbourne a wonderful city with wonderful people, with warm-hearted. Thank you. What we are doing to achieve the MDG goals in our organization. As you know, Afghanistan has been through war for 30 years. Going through war for 30 years, the victim was the women and children in Afghanistan. Being the victim is something that is completely destroyed the women of Afghanistan. It destroyed them as a whole, not as a woman. Their complete life has been destroyed through the war. How could you reach for those women to try to teach them about their health, about their body, especially that 80 to 90% of the population are uneducated, they are not able to read and write. So for just that purpose, our organization decided to really target universal education, equality, gender equality, and child maternal health in order to reach for the MDG goal. Why we are targeting universal education? Because the women of Afghanistan need to know what's about their body, because they don't know. They do not have any training in hygiene, in nutrition, in child development, in their own body. As a matter of fact, most of the women in Afghanistan went through the early child marriage. And when you go through early child marriage, you know you by yourself are a child. How could you take care of a child? How could you deliver a child? And especially in a country that the health service is not available. In the rural area, in the villages, people do not have a clinic. They don't have a midwife. They don't have a service that they can go and deliver their baby. Most of the baby is being delivered at home. And that's the reason we try to provide education. Try to train those people. Try to train the women. And also the grandmother, the auntie, the neighbor, how to take care of those women to try to deliver their baby. Because as you know, maternal mortality rate is one of the second highest in Afghanistan. We we lose so many baby and so many mother because the mother don't know how to take care of their children. So we try to implement program, try to teach them how to protect themselves, prevent themselves from different diseases. Because right now for Afghanistan it's too early to just say we are going to open clinic and we are going to have a hospital, because most of the place is not applicable. We have, yes, hospital and clinic, but human resources so shortage. We don't have enough doctor. We don't have enough nurses. We don't have enough midwife in order for us to provide those services. So, as an individual, everyone is responsible to take care of everyone else's health and to try to help. In order to help, you must give them training to be able to teach them how to protect themselves, what to do in a situation of emergency. In a country that there is no water, the water is not available, we don't have clean water. How do you teach people to take care of themselves when they don't know that in this water is the reason that they get sick? So we must train them how to cure the water, what to do, how to use the water in order to not to get sick. Do you know a lot of diarrhea, cholera in Afghanistan because we don't have a clean water? Yes, there is a clean water maybe in the city, but most of our population live in the village. They are farmers. They are far away from the city. And also the situation in Afghanistan is right now, as most of you know, there is still war in Afghanistan. Safety is not available for those people. When they want to travel to come to the nearby site village like clinic or hospital, their safety is in danger. Most of the family will not allow their wife or their daughter or their children to go out of the house to go to big city because of security. Security is a big issue in Afghanistan. And that's the reason we decide as an organization to implement program, to train people how to protect themselves. And it has been very successful. We have reached many thousands and thousands of women and children, but still we have a long way to go. Gender equity. Why we target gender equity? Because in Afghanistan, always half of the population has been considered. The other half, or more than other half, are women. Women have been completely ignored. So if you really want to have a healthy nation, you must target the other half of the population, because those half are the ones who are taking care of the rest of the population. So we must really try to teach them and work with both sex, male and female, and try to teach them because they have been abused. A lot of women has been abused through violation. Many things happening in Afghanistan, especially when war is there. Men are frustrated or they don't have a job and they don't have money. The first victim is their children, to beat their children, to beat their wife, to do all kinds of violence against them. So we must try to train those men to be able to work with those women in a human manner. Right now, that's another biggest issue. Maternal child health, what we do, we try to train people side by side as education, also health education. We do have some clinic. We have about 7 clinics all over Afghanistan. But what we do in those clinics, we try to teach them side by side health education, because we believe that reproductive health, hygiene, malnutrition is so important that we have to target those population through those kind of prevention, because right now the service is not that much available in Afghanistan. We don't have it. We don't have resource, we don't have human resource. So as a result, we must work, try to train them, try to help them to help themselves. And that's we are trying to implement programs such as nutrition program, such as reproductive health, such as hygiene, and to people can protect themselves. So these are the issues that we are trying to achieve the MDG goal. And we have reached about 7 million women and children in that area. And we run hospital right now, but we really need a lot of resource for it. Thank you. I would love to talk about it more, but I think that I will prefer to answer questions from you people, and thank you for listening. Yes.
Thank you, Sakina. Thank you, Dr. Sakina. I guess it's a timely reminder of our own country's links to yours at the moment. Well, as you know, tonight's discussion is held in association with the Melbourne Writers' Festival, in addition to Melbourne Conversations and the University of Melbourne, and our next speaker is very much at home in literary circles. Angela Savage is a community healthcare advocate turned novelist. Her first novel, Behind the Night Bazaar, won the 2004 Victorian Premier's Literary Award for an unpublished manuscript category, and when published it was shortlisted for the 2007 Ned Kelly Awards as Best First Book. The book is based largely on her experience in Southeast Asia working with the Red Cross to set up a program on HIV/AIDS during the 1990s, after which Angela established and headed the Australian Red Cross HIV/AIDS Mekong sub-regional program. She spent several years with Sexual Health and Family Planning Australia, working mostly in the South Pacific, and currently heads up a peak body of community development organisations in Melbourne. Angela's second novel, The Half-Child, was published recently, and she is a guest of this year's Melbourne's Writers' Festival and is also with us tonight. Please make Angela Savage very welcome.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen and esteemed colleagues, good evening. Sitting on that panel listening to the speakers, I was reminded of all of the reasons I loved working in international development and why I miss it so much. And I'm here in my capacity, however, tonight as a writer, and so my presentation is a lot more personal. But I hope you'll see how it's on the same trajectory of the kinds of issues that have been discussed tonight. What I remembered vividly as I was listening to the speakers was a friend of mine in Melbourne during one of my visits back from Southeast Asia, and I think at that stage I'd been spending quite a bit of time in Cambodia in the early 1990s, which was a very troubled place. And she said to me, "I don't know how you can do it. I watch the news and I just want to turn it off. It's all so depressing." And I said, I feel really sorry for you, because I'm there and I'm seeing something that's the opposite of depressing. I'm seeing the hope that Sir Gus mentioned. I'm seeing the work of people like Dr. Sakina and Dame Carol, and I have no excuse to do anything other than hope and to try. As Tracy mentioned, I had a career of about 12 years, which is still off and on in international development, and was working primarily in the area of HIV and sexual health education at a time when the issue was very new to the Greater Mekong sub-region. I had the privilege of helping the Lao Red Cross to establish its program on AIDS, and worked in Vietnam, Cambodia, southern China and Burma during that time. But I'd always wanted to be a writer, and so after 6.5 years in Southeast Asia, I returned to Melbourne with the ambition of fulfilling this long-held dream. I think I just had to have an interesting enough life before I could start writing. And I took some time out of the workforce and went about this attempt to write my first novel, which was a shamelessly autobiographical account of a 20-something Australian woman's experiences in Laos in the early 90s. And I got to the end and thought, no, this isn't going anywhere. Lots of textual detail, no plot. So I turned to crime, as you do. I was writing short stories, and one of them won third prize at the Sisters in Crime Scarlet Stiletto Awards. And that story was set in Bangkok and featured an Australian expatriate detective called Jane. And that was enough encouragement for me to pursue this genre. Interestingly, the more I got into the crime genre, the more it seemed the appropriate vehicle to explore the kinds of issues and ideas that I had, because working cross-culturally is a lot like being a detective. You're always trying to figure out the big picture from a small set of clues. you're trying to work out a reliable source from someone who's just trying to, take you for a ride, and you're searching for meanings lost in translation. And I also believe that contemporary crime is where you see the most vivid critique of contemporary society. Some of us, crime writers, including my colleague Gary Disher, would argue that non-genre literary novels have kind of lost the plot in that area, with few exceptions. So writing gave me the opportunity to reflect on my experiences, and also because I've always enjoyed reading the kinds of books that at the end of which I get to and I think, I think I've just learned something. But I didn't feel like it at the time, and I didn't feel like I was being hammered over the head. I wanted to write those kinds of novels too, and I wanted to write novels that are based around ideas, but that are entertaining reads. And I thought I would read a short extract to give you an idea about how some of the ideas that I grappled with as an aid worker have been translated into my fiction. I hope that it doesn't come across as didactic. I found that one of the best ways to not write autobiography was to give the minor characters in my story the traits that I might have had. So there is an HIV activist in this book, but in fact the main character finds his whole work in HIV a real distraction to their relationship, and that was quite freeing. So in this passage that I'm reading, the main character, whose name is Jane Keeney, is reflecting on an inappropriate relationship that she's found herself in with an Australian Federal Police officer, and her friendship with the aforementioned HIV activist, and grappling with some of the issues that their relationship has thrown up. And the novel centres around paedophilia and is set during a time when the Australian government instituted the new extraterritorial legislation to allow the policing of child sex crimes committed overseas. It wasn't only their relationship that made her uneasy. Jane also had doubts about Mark's management of the case. He insisted there was a straight line between the problem and its solution. Paedophilia was a crime, and those who perpetrated it were criminals. Solution? Arrest those responsible and put them on trial. In this, he had both the letter of the law and common sense behind him. What made Jane sceptical was that Mark clung to this belief despite his experience. Didier would say such responses failed to take into account the complexity of the problem. They're missing the point, he'd told her. For every pedophile put behind bars, there's at least one other to take his place. For every child rescued from a brothel, the ratio is much higher. In the poorer areas, there'll be 5, maybe 10 others. And those in power will keep turning a blind eye because they benefit the most from maintaining the status quo. It's not about individuals, it's about the whole rotten system. So what's the solution? Didier shrugged. We must find a way to eradicate poverty. Oh, great, she'd snorted. It's good to see you setting realistic goals. But it's true, mon ami, he said with a sad smile. The arrest of one Australian pedophile might keep people in your country happy, make them feel good because their government looks like it's doing something, but it won't change anything. Surely it's better to do something rather than nothing. Didier looked so disappointed she regretted her words. Maybe you're right, he said. Maybe I'm not realistic. But for me, well, it's like wearing glasses. I can take them off. He removed his spectacles and waved them in the air. But I can never look at the world again without knowing what I see is out of focus. Meaning what? Meaning I cannot support doing something when I know it will not work. In that, along with everything else, Didier set his sights on the biggest possible picture. The path he plotted between the problem and its solution was as circuitous as Mark's was direct. Caught between the two, Jane saw merit in both, but was satisfied by neither. Thank you. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you indeed to all of our panellists for some really salient, inspiring seems to be not quite the right word, but it's been really wonderful listening to all of you. And I guess there's a common theme, despite the differences that are running through all of the work and all of the things that you've talked to us about. I'm going to start with Dr. Sakina and pick up on Angela's theme about, I guess, that dilemma of thinking that the problem is so insurmountable that it's easier to do nothing, and starting, as you did, on an education reform from a very unlikely background that started with your father, which I think is also something that a lot of people would find slightly challenging to the stereotype of Afghani men. Do you want to just take us to the heart of what started your own commitment to thinking that education was the key to the work that you've been doing?
Thank you. Thank you very much for this question. Yes, I think that one thing as a child, when I was growing up in Afghanistan, I just day to day, I saw that many women are being taken to the graveyard because they were delivering baby. And also I was seeing that many children are being taken to the graveyard because they were dying. And my own mother had 15 pregnancy. From 15 pregnancy that she had, 5 of her are alive. The rest of children died. So my mother in front of my own eyes was bleeding to death every time that she delivered baby. So as a child, it traumatized me. Always I wanted to be a doctor to try to help the women of Afghanistan. And when the situation came that I wanted to go to the university, I couldn't because my family were living in Herat and there wasn't a dormitory in Kabul that I could go live there. So I went to the US and completed my education there. But I had a wonderful father because at that time, you can imagine, let's say 30 years ago, 40 years ago, at that time, my father had a vision. He was not educated himself, but he really always encouraged me to complete my education. And so he was the one who sent me personally to United States, although he wasn't a very rich man, and also he wasn't from elite group, and also he wasn't working with the government at all. But he strongly believed in education. So just having a father like that and completed my education, and my country was invaded by Russian. So the first thing I wanted to do, I wanted to give the opportunity, the chance that I had to the women of Afghanistan. And that's really promoted me to really go after the education. And I knew that if the women of Afghanistan are educated, they are able to have a better life. They will have a healthier life. They will be successful, and they have sustainable life. And they have a opportunity for income. They were very poor, and still they are very, very poor. Yes.
It's also the key to breaking cycles of poverty. I mean, we're talking about health being part of that, but...
Well, absolutely. I really strongly believe that, again, education is the key issue to overcome poverty, to overcome health, to overcome freedom. That is, I really strongly believe, because I could see through this 20 years of working with women and children that the progress has been made. It is slow, but I could see definitely that has been made because the women are stronger, they are holding job, they are healthier, they are more economically sound better, they are able to say what they want to say, they are taking the charge of their life because they could say no, because the women's rights are being absorbed because they are getting education. You know, human's right is a right of every individual. So health is a human's right. Education is a human's right. So these are the issues that we are dealing in area of education in order to achieve the human's right, women's right, and MDG goal. I really believe strongly on that.
Dame Carol, I want to get you to respond to, because I think there's some similar themes, but you talked about it's very hard to introduce anything that would resemble any kind of health care or health health programs if a woman has to walk 2 days to get to a doctor. And you were talking about similar but quite different challenges to being able to address the sorts of issues in your country.
Yes. Well, first I'd say again, education. It's got to be basic to everything, and particularly education for women and girls. And we've got to look beyond the formal systems. In a country, say like PNG, where we do not have universal primary education, although in elementary level we get to about 80% in, by the time they're in primary school it drops, and by the time we get up to higher levels it drops enormously. So education of women and girls is basic to any of this. And in these areas we've got to go into the community. In a country like Papua New Guinea, where 97% of the land is owned by the people, 3% has been alienated, we don't want our people leaving the land and coming into the urban areas. We have to learn how to get education to people. And, of course, some will leave, but we want them to be able to go back. And so here we need to leapfrog into the future, as in my thinking. Only a few weeks ago I was sitting on the top in a village up in Kokoda when I walked in with some of the families from here, a couple of families who lost their loved ones in the crash last year, and we went up to the crash site. Here I am sitting up there near the crash site on my BlackBerry, taking in emails, and around me are lots of kids with this typical distended stomachs of kwashiorkor, protein deficiency. Now somehow we've got to combine those two worlds, and we've got to get the modern technology to be able to leapfrog us into the future and take knowledge to people and think beyond the box into flexible outward learning. And this is what I've focused on in my own electorate. Although my electorate is urban, I've focused on the masses that have missed out on the formal system. Because as long as we have increasing masses missing out on the formal systems, other issues kick in, like law and order problems, frustration, and all of those things. So we must reach our people with education. Yeah.
So Gus, you've been nodding significantly. And I want to ask you, I guess, to respond to, you talked about the Global Alliance for Vaccines, of which you're immensely proud, and rightly so. But listening to Dr. Sakina, and in fact also the experience of Dame Carol, both countries with their share of law and order problems, the most extreme, of course, Afghanistan. How do you, and both women have talked about education being the key. Is that what you see the greatest obstacle to achieving a global health a priority for global health?
Well, you won't get this passionate advocate for health ever to say a word against education. In my darker moments, I say to myself, well, health and education are both important, but education might even be just a bit more important. So I totally agree with both speakers. I do have a very specific question, however. You might think I'm not trying to squib your question, but you might think there's a bit more too specific. But I am constantly appalled by the fact that we rich countries hire brains from the developing countries that are so desperately needed there. And Dr. Sakina mentioned specifically doctors and nurses. Now, what, if anything, should we be doing to stop England, Canada, Australia announcing in the newspaper, we've just taken 300 nurses from India or Fiji or wherever? Isn't this a very big problem? And aren't we being unutterably selfish when our own training programs could rapidly make up for the shortfall in nurses that we have if only we supported our educational systems enough?
That's absolutely. But